Welcome, I'm Bill Wake. This is my summary of the work we've been doing on Twitch the last week, well, few weeks really. And we've been working on this personal finance tool called Fiume. The idea is to let you run multiple scenarios on sort of medium to long-term outlook. Last week, we worked on persistence updates. So plans used to distinguish pools from streams, but we made a change where the LEA, which is the combination liability, expense, income, and asset, we moved the type over there. So plans don't need that distinction anymore. And we've added a new growth field to LEA that's going to be tied to the assumptions work we're starting working on. The order I worked on these was a little bit more mixed up, but I think this is a better order to explain it. Anyway, the other thing we worked on was percent-based assumptions. So I want to be able to say, what if the inflation rate is 5% or the return on my investments drops to 2% or things like that. So we'd like to have these values that we can kind of quickly adjust and get a feeling for whether our plan is robust against these kinds of changes. All right, and as far as what we did the CRUD, the create, read, update, delete stuff, and we have sliders that update their values as you move them. We haven't done is we haven't tied those to the values that we want to change, and in particular, we want to start working on kind of interest rate kind of things. That's the growth field, and we haven't tied that together, but next week we'll do that. All right, so one of the things we're doing is around persistence, and it's come up a few times. We have to change fields sometimes, or we want to, as part of a refactoring. And so our goal is a class or struct, whatever, gets a new field that's going to replace some existing ones. And so the steps are you add the new field, but you make it optional. And it has to be optional because the way the built-in IO decoding is, if a field is optional and it's not there, it's not an error, it just sets it to nil and goes on. Okay, then we provide a non-optional accessor to the new field. So if the new field is present, we use it. If it's not, we go to the old field for the value. And we make all the clients use that accessor. So they're all funneling through there. And then when you load the system, we set the new field. Basically, we're enforcing that being set. So we don't have to enforce that until we're ready to update, but we'll basically read in the old fields, compute the value of the new field, set the value of the new field. Then when they use that accessor, they're only getting the new field. Okay, and then we can release it at that point. And then sometime in the future, presumably next release, we're going to delete the old fields and no longer look for them and make the new fields non-optional. So because we've updated the fields, when we did that load, we set the value, and if you save that, now everything's going to have the new format, and so we don't need the old fields. We don't need to be non-optional because we have it always. But what this means is you have to do this in kind of a two-phase sort of thing. You can make your changes, you got to do some sort of update process, and then in the next release or so, you can clean up the rest of the way. So let's take a quick demo and a look at the code. Okay, so here I've created a bunch of income, assets, expenses, and liabilities, just various ones. Whatever they add up to yields this curve. And the thing we've added is this notion of assumptions. I've got a couple in here. We just start with none, which is just 0%, flat, no growth kind of situation. I added this notion of an ROI. It's got a slider. We can set that value. Ideally, this thing would be about half as high, the window, and we could see to the graph in the background, and we would see the effect of changing the ROI. Or we can add a new one. All right, let's add inflation, I guess. Okay, and we're saying this could range over 1 to, well, let's be slightly more optimistic. 33, but notice I don't have a current value is not in that range, so I get a warning. And let's say it's 5%. Okay, so I'm creating this new assumption. All right, I've got the list of these. At this point, we're only doing percent ones, so I think we'll probably sort them by their type. So you can kind of control different areas. All right, now if we go into one of these, let's just edit this. Notice we have this growth. We can choose which of these we want to go by. So Social Security, let's say that keeps up with inflation. Okay, so the growth in this thing would then be whatever we've set the inflation rate to. If we set it down to 5%, it's a lot lower than if we set it to 85% or 25%. Okay, but there's no tie-in now from this field to the scenario computation, but that's what's next week. We'll work on that. We'll start seeing these little exponential curves like you get when you start doing interest rate calculations and so on. But some of these, like expenses, if they have inflation, they have a curve too, and the curve is going down on you. So hopefully your income inflation beats your expense inflation. All right, so let's take a look. So first thing we'll talk about is the persistence changes. The one we had before was we added this Leia type last time. So it used to be optional. This week we changed it to required and deleted the update code that would set it. Okay. And now we're making another change. Well, two more changes. One is we have this first and last as date specifiers, but since we created that, we've created a concept of a date range, and that's actually more useful for us. You don't often ask for just the one or just the other. Really, it's only when you're editing them that you do that. So I'd like to make this a dates object. So I'm starting it optional. And then I'm giving it that accessor. So you can see the kind of thing we're doing there. All right. And the second one we added was the growth. That's optional. I didn't bother giving it an accessor because the only thing we do with it is display it on that one line, and we don't use it for any computation or any other activity. So it's not it's not as commonly used as dates, which we use all the time. All right, and so let's go look at plan. So the structure we have is there's a plans object that contains a bunch of plan objects. The plan objects contain layers or recursive versions, groups, or scenarios. And so the plan is where we put the update. You could do it differently. Let's see, well, there's two changes. There's a change here too. So in our original form, the plan was what knew if it was a pool like assets or a stream like income. And we've moved that type down into the layer where it really belongs. And instead, we just want to keep track of, am I looking at a layer or a group or a scenario? And so we added the new one, but pool and stream are out there in the wild. So we have to still support them until we get rid of them. And the way we get rid of them is an update function. Let me jump down there. So update says there's really kind of two cases. It's either pool, stream, or layer, or it's group and scenarios. And a layer, we're going to say, okay, set the type of the plan to layer instead of being pool or stream if it's not already layer. And modify the amount to contain a growth variable. So even though growth is optional as a field, we're going to set it one way or the other at when we first load, we do an update. And the default for us is an assumption of flat growth. And that's really the default on the layers. When they choose a growth rate, they get flat growth as the default. So we're putting that one in after the update. After every user has updated, we know that growth will always be set one way or the other, and we'll be able to take that optional stuff off and get rid of the accessor and so on. Okay, so the other one you can see we're doing is we're creating it with the dates. And we're getting the dates from the existing Leia object. So the plan contains a Leia. Leia has the dates, and we'll grab those dates and set our dates field so we know we're getting that set. All right, the group and scenarios, that's just the recursive case. Then contain children that have Leias. So recursively, we just always update groups and scenarios. they're all calling back to this update function. That kind of covers the persistence. Next week when we come in, we'll take out this function, we'll clean up growth, we'll clean up dates, and we'll clean up the type up here to only have Leia, no pool or stream. All right, so let's look at assumption. So far, I'm saying there's going to be a percent assumption. I also want to be able to assume things about years or amounts. So another interesting robustness thing would be like, what if I raised my, my monthly monthly income I take from my retirement accounts from $2,000 to $4,000 a month? What would that do? Would I run out of money at 72, or what would happen? There's future ones coming, but we're starting with percent. An assumption, it's got an ID because it's in lists, views, and stuff like that. It knows that type. It's got a name, so ROI or inflation, and it's got min, max, and current values. I'm treating them as ints. That'll cover the cases of percents, dates, and amounts, even though there'll be money in one case and percents in another and so on. We're going to keep this generic to that. All right, and so there's a couple ways to build it. This one, you're just feeding in all the values. This one, you're modifying an assumption with a new current value. So that's more like the sliders do. Okay, and then the other thing that you have to do is compare them. And right now we just sort them by name. So we come, in that assumption list, we sort them by name. So that's how that's done. All right, now as it stands, this is very minimal behavior, almost none really. It's just a data bag for this thing that's out there. And I don't think it'll grow much in concept from that, but the computation of like net worth and things like that, we'll have to consult an assumption to say what's your current value and know whether it's dealing with percent or whatever. All right, and then we have the assumptions, and that corresponds to the list of them. So the core of it is it contains an array of assumption, and we always started off with that none of 0%. Okay, and so our functions, we can load, we can add to it, we can find an existing one, we can remove it, replace it, and we can do verified. And verified is saying if you ask for a name that really isn't there, we're just going to give you flat growth as a default. It's kind of a compromise at this point. I'm not sure how to hook everything together. It probably should be some sort of error, or we should make it so you just can't make that error. But the way it is now, we're just keeping the name of the assumption around. And then finally, it's a sequence, so we can do for eaches on them and things like that. All right, and then let's look at the views. I guess we'll start with the assumption view. Okay, so this view, really, you set it up with an assumption, and it needs an update action and a delete action. Because, update action corresponds to the little edit button, and delete corresponds to the little trash can. We basically produce, if you do an edit, we call up at the edit view, which we haven't looked at yet, and it produces a new assumption based on whatever you saved, and we're calling update action so that change gets put in place. And that kind of keeps the persistent stuff up at the higher levels. We just, whatever action you pass in, we do it. Okay, so we save those fields, and then it just is these pieces. There's the name, like ROI. There's the value of the field, and there's a slider. It's active, and then the trash can. Let's see down here, the delete button and the editing button. Okay, so pretty straightforward. I'm not totally happy with the look of it. All right, and then the last thing on here is just the sheet that will be called when you click that button. So in normal use, the slider is there so you can do your updates, update your scenario view based on those sliders is the intent. And but if you want to go back and edit them, you can do that. Next, let's look at the assumptions. That's just that list of them. So it's got a header area. It's got a little pyramid icon on the word assumptions, and the add button. So that's up on the top. Again, we use the edit assumption view, but this time we pass in create instead of update. And the code that happens when you edit, well, this is the top level view, so it does the actual work. It puts the new assumption in the assumptions list. And the display is just, there's a list of them. We'll put them in a section with that header. I will probably change that later, but I think I'll make sections based on types once I have percent and date and so on. But anyway, you just run through the list of these things and call assumption view on each one with the actions in place here. Okay, and that's all you have to do. Pretty simple list. And then finally, assumptions view, edit assumption view rather. It's got the action. It's got the assumption it's working on, the starting point for it, and the name of the button. So this button could be create or update depending which activity you're doing. And similarly, the title is based on that create or update. We have state, and the state corresponds to the fields in the form since we're editing with them. So when we come in, we initialize all those local fields to the field from the assumption we're working from. All right, and the body is just the form. So it's got the name, the min, the current, the max, and then a little error check thing. So if the range is not okay, then we put an error message out. So let's make the max 10. That's smaller than current, so we get the warning. All right, and then finally the create button, well, create or update button. And it builds the new one based on the field values and then passes it back to the action. All right, let's see, there's range, two more we use. Sorry, the valid controls whether the create button is visible or not, or active or not. It requires the name to be empty and the range to be okay. Range okay is what triggers that message I just showed. It makes sure min less than or equal to current and current less than or equal to max, like the message. All right. From here, next week, we'll make our persistence changes. So I'll get rid of that update function and make things required that are required and so on now. Then we're going to move into making assumptions work on interest calculations. So that growth field, and I'd like you to be able to put in, if my interest rate is 2% a year, I don't know. You don't get that on a credit card account, or a checking account anymore. But whatever it is, I'm going to put it in, and I'd like the slider to have the range. And as I move the range, I want the scenarios to vary. And first they'll have some curve to them because your interest rate builds money on money, and but those curves will change as you work on changing the interest rate. Once those are in, we'll work on some date or money-based assumptions. I think we'll do both eventually because I'd like to do some things I could set my retirement date. If I set my retirement date to 2025, and once that retirement date kicks in, well, actually, retirement, when you stop working, it would stop some income streams. The Social Security date, you have a choice of what year from 62 to 70, what year you want to start taking Social Security. The kind of the Social Security date, Social Security start date maybe would be a nice one to look at some scenarios for. So both those make sense. Date for those, and then money for things like how much do I spend a month. Okay, and that'll get us there. Okay. All right, so we're live Monday through Thursday on Twitch, 2 to 4:30 Eastern Time or 6 to 8:30 p.m. UTC. If you go to xp123.com/Twitch, you can catch the live session when it's on, or you can go to xp123.com/YouTube and you get the previous sessions. They're time delayed a week or two, and they're lightly edited. So I hope you can join us sometime. Take care. Bye-bye.